Okay, welcome back to the Modern Revolution. My name is Pete Deely. Thanks for coming back and listening to another episode. As you know, we have all these wonderful and fascinating people that we talk to. However, we don't tell you why they're wonderful. We don't tell you why they're fascinating. Instead, we ask you to listen to them. So I don't go through some long explanation about all the amazing things they've done and the amazing people they are. Instead, we ask you to listen deeply, and towards the end of the episode, we will tell you where you can learn more about them if they resonate with you and you want to learn more about them. So, my good fortune continues today. So, I have Amanda Blackwood. Amanda, thank you for spending time with me. I'm very grateful you came on the show.
And thank you so much for having me. I very much appreciate spending this time with you.
So, Amanda, we like to kind of begin with the notion of what problem in the world are you working on? What problem are you trying to solve?
Human trafficking. And that sounds
Whoa,
really big.
it is a big subject, right? And I think, Amanda, like that is one of those things that have come into our consciousness in a way it wasn't in the past. And so the notion of human trafficking, there's Hollywood, there's right, there's clips that people might have seen, but I'm not sure that everybody, when they hear those words, hears the same thing. So may I ask you to talk a little bit about like what human trafficking is?
Absolutely. So I always tell people to find a reliable source if they're going to be looking up what human trafficking is.
Hmm.
You don't want to look this up on Google. You don't want to find it on Wikipedia. These are fallible resources that are human run.
Okay.
Look for something that's going to have a definitive constant to it. The Department of Homeland Security is a really good place to start.
Okay. Interesting.
So they define human trafficking as the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain commercial sex acts or labor from
Mm,
another person.
okay.
So if you notice, there's several key things missing. No
Okay.
mention of transportation,
Hmm.
because human trafficking and human smuggling are two completely separate things, though they do overlap often.
Okay.
And there's no mention of age.
Mm,
A
yes.
lot of times people believe that trafficking only happens to people under the age of 18, when really that only makes up 1/4 of all victims worldwide. Most
Okay.
are over the age of 18.
Okay. Yeah, well, as you're talking, I'm realizing about my own preconceptions because I think that when you say those words, the first thing that I think of is a young woman under 18 being brought somewhere for forced sexual acts or whatever is the right term for that. But I mean, I think you know what I'm trying to say. That's
Right.
the but I think what you're saying is that this is actually a broader problem. It addresses human conditions that are not just young girls being brought someplace, but that there's other things going on. So, can maybe you talk a little bit about how you came to understand it yourself and sort of describe where your relationship to this problem came about?
So in 2018, I believe it was February, I was
Hmm.
sitting in the front row of an anti trafficking conference out here in Colorado.
Okay.
And I was sitting down in the front row because I was all fired up and excited. I'd been through some stuff in my past, but I wanted to be able to help other people. And I saw this as my opportunity to do so.
Okay.
I wanted to go and pull all the kids out of trafficking and save kids because that's what I believed at the time, too.
Right.
But as I sat there and I listened to person after person after person getting up on the stage and talking, and FBI agents and people who
Mm,
ran nonprofit charity organizations and survivors of trafficking, I realized that the way that they were describing it, just like I did with
right.
that basic definition, that not only was I too a survivor,
Mm.
but I was a survivor 3 separate times.
And how old were you when when this happens?
Remember what I said? That's usually the first question I get. I was already prepared. So the
Yeah.
first time I was trafficked, I was
Well,
18.
no, when you have the epiphany, how old are you when you're
Oh,
sitting listening?
when that happened, I was 38 years old.
So you were 38, sitting there, enthusiastically looking to bring your energy to deal with human trafficking on the planet. And then it's in that moment of epiphany. So this wasn't an incremental process. You didn't like take step by step by step. Okay, now I'm ready to bring my energy here to help. This happened in a moment, it sounds like. Like once you kind of heard this, all of a sudden you went back and understood your life differently in kind of an instant. I mean, is that a fair paraphrase of what you just said?
It was like being smashed in the face with a baseball bat.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it takes a little while for that pain, that initial urge of pain, that massive surge that goes all the way through your entire body to make your toes
Yeah.
curl.
Wow.
It takes a while for that to kind of dissipate, for you to really start dealing with the fact that, hey, I just got hit in the face with a baseball bat. At first,
Yeah.
you don't realize it's happened. It
Right.
took me a while to be able to really deal with it. But yeah, I had no idea until that day.
Wow. So at 38, you're past, I mean, I'm 53. So 38 still looks very young to me, but you're not so young that you haven't had a meaningful amount of experiences for you to understand. So you probably felt like you understood yourself pretty well at 38. I mean, most, you're like, yeah, you feel like, well, I know who I am and I know what it's been about, my life's been about. And then in this, what sounds like a very brief set of moments, hours, whatever it might have been, things get kind of turned upside down. So you have this. So maybe you can now describe a little bit, like after this epiphany happens, and you settle down from the shock of like what you feel like you just learned about yourself. You went to learn about the world. Now you learned about yourself. Is kind of what it sounds like. What did you start to kind of go back and reframe? What experiences did you reframe?
Right off the bat, I knew that one of my experiences had been trafficking.
Okay.
I started to focus in on that. That one happened when I was 19 years old.
Okay.
Later on, I started to recognize that something that happened when I was 18 was also trafficking.
Okay.
And I wasn't yet ready to admit to it or deal with it, but it
Sure.
took about a year and a half. And suddenly that baseball bat returned.
Okay.
The last person that trafficked me had made me famous on a pornography website
Oh my
using photos
goodness.
and videos that were taken during my trafficking against my will.
Oh my
And they
gosh.
had put all of this stuff up on different social media websites and stuff, including all of my social media information and my home address information, anything
Oh,
they had on me.
wow.
And that baseball bat took the form of a man asking for my autograph standing in an aisle of a grocery store here in Denver, Colorado.
Okay.
That was in August of 2019. So when that happened, that was when I said, I have to just finally admit that, yes, that last time was trafficking. He is still profiting off of me, and I can't do this alone anymore.
Wow. So the just to kind of put the sequence in place, the autograph occurs post epiphany, but you haven't really come to terms with what actually happened. Is that what you said? Like when does
For the
is that
last event of trafficking, I
okay.
hadn't yet admitted that it was trafficking. I
Okay.
still had
Okay.
a lot of those memories blocked out on
Sure.
purpose. It was pretty
Sure.
horrific, but it was also fairly recent.
Okay.
So the last time I was trafficked, I was only 31 years old.
Okay. Okay.
So when that happened, when I was made famous on the pornography website, it was only 8 years later.
Right.
I hadn't quite yet dealt with it yet.
Okay. Well, so um there's three different instances that you connect to in this epiphany. And there's 3 different, well, 18 and 19 is pretty similar times of your life, so you were probably a very similar person, first and second one. The third one
Yeah.
seems like you'd be in a very different point of life. It also sounds like it was a different experience. And you're under no obligation to talk about any detail of these 3 experiences, but to the extent you'd like to bring that into the conversation, like what types of things would you want to talk about in terms of those three things, those three experiences.
Um,
I think the third one's pretty clear, right? So somebody against your will took your image and likeness in private moments or whatever, and then sold them. It sounds like
well, they weren't quite as private as
as you
things
thought.
like that should be.
Yeah.
Um, I had known that man for 7 years.
Oh my goodness.
He and I had developed a relationship. I had been, because of the first two incidences and stuff that happened in my childhood, I was very closed off. I
Okay.
wasn't really very open about a lot of stuff, but because we had gotten to know each other and I saw him as a safe person, I began
Mm,
to open up to him and I started to tell him things about my past, about my life. And he was very understanding and kind.
Mhm.
And over this period of 7 years, this was a long distance relationship. He came to visit me. I went out to go and visit him. And he saw me go from being basically a beggar in the streets to being a director of public safety and security for 6 different properties in LA County.
Wow.
I had moved up in the world and I had
Sure.
gained a footing and really kind of established myself. And that was when he saw his opportunity to ask me to get a fiance visa and move to Scotland to go and be with him.
Wow.
It took him 7 years to get me there, and it took him 7 days to start trafficking me.
Oh my goodness.
It was a revolving door. Nothing that happened there was in the privacy of our home. It was in his home. Nothing
Mm,
belonged to me.
yeah. Oh my goodness. That's extraordinary. So this was a long experience in an immediate betrayal once you kind of did what that person maybe they wanted you to do all those 7 years, or maybe I don't know what was in their mind. I mean, to kind of spend all this time cultivating grooming is kind of what it sounds like, grooming a person to then leave the country and go out and experience this. How terrifying.
Yeah. And I know that I wasn't the first person that he ever did it to. I don't
Sure.
believe I'm the last person,
Yeah.
but a big part of this was part of the reason I saw him as being such a safe person was because he also happened to be a police officer who worked in the schools.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Not a great guy, you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, yeah. So someone in what should be the most trustworthy of characters to be around children, to be around, obviously, and I can't bring myself to think about like if there are all these kids that were around him for all those years, what is out there that probably nobody knows about but him.
Right.
That maybe even those people don't know about. Well, I mean, in that sort of violent situation, how did you extricate yourself then and sort of recognize, oh, I got to get out of here because
Oh, there were so many
you're
there were
crossing
so
the
many
pond, right?
tries. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and he had my driver's license, he had
Wow.
my passport, he had my debit card, all within less than an hour of me landing on the ground over there in Scotland. And he said that it
Oh
was for safekeeping because you never know when somebody's going to break into the house, and he would put it all in his little safe. And we wouldn't have to worry about it that way because I wouldn't be needing any of those things. He would take care of me.
wow.
Yeah. So I couldn't really grab my passport and head to the American embassy. First of all, I didn't know where it was. I
Sure.
didn't have a computer anymore after he took it away from me.
Oh my
He took it
goodness.
away from me because he found out that I had taken what little money I had left and tried to purchase an emergency flight home with whatever I could afford. And I had to
Right.
wait 5 days for that flight. But I had to con him into giving me my passport and my debit card to be able to even do that.
Okay.
So I bought that flight. And then because of the abuse, I ended up with a kidney infection so severe I was in the hospital when the flight took off and it was non refundable.
Oh my goodness.
So the next time I tried to find a way out, it was not one of those ways that you have an existing life afterward. I
Okay.
tried to take my own life,
Oh my goodness. Okay. Okay.
and it got really dark.
Sure.
I was going through a lot more than just trafficking. Yeah,
Okay.
and when we say trafficking here in the U.S., we think instantly of sex trafficking, but remember, there's that whole
Sure.
forced labor trafficking also. And I was an in-house servant when I wasn't entertaining his guests, as we would call them, through the revolving door.
Hmm.
I was working all day long every day,
Wow.
or I would be waterboarded. I would be deprived of food. I went 8.5 days
Wow.
without sleep, as far as I can remember, but things start getting fuzzy after about 2 or 3 days.
Sure.
You learn to just comply. And when my attempt to take my life failed because a 4-year-old child stopped me,
A
the
4-year-old
boy was an
child.
angel.
Oh, oh my goodness. Well, what does that mean? A 4-year-old child stopped you. Like, how did that happen?
I had gone to the train station and was sitting there. Back then, I was a smoker. I was
Right.
having what I thought was going to be my last cigarette.
Uh-huh.
And a man walked out onto the platform and he asked me for a light. And I gave him my lighter and I told him, "You can keep it. I
Hmm.
won't need it anymore." And I wanted him to ask me why.
Right.
And he didn't ask. And he lit his cigarette and he says, "Oh, I don't need it either." And he handed it back.
Okay.
And I knew I couldn't make him care. I had been trying all day long. I'd been walking around town just trying to get somebody to just notice me and see that I was still human because I didn't feel human anymore.
Okay.
And this little guy, little bitty boy, about 4, came
Uh-huh.
out onto the platform and grabbed this man's hand. And this little boy looked at me. And when he looked at me, you know how we do that thing when kids are looking at us where we try to make ourselves happy so that the kid doesn't get
Yeah,
sad
yeah.
because they
Right.
see us being sad. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
right.
tried that and it didn't work.
Okay.
The kid saw right through me
Wow.
and he looked at me and he just bore holes through me with his eyeballs. It
Mm,
was incredible. And I knew in that moment that I couldn't do what it was that I was set to do that day,
okay.
because the first real trauma that I could ever remember experiencing happened when I was about his age. And I
Mm,
couldn't do that to this child.
okay.
So before I knew what was happening, I had gotten up and started running back to my prison. I wrote a poem on my way, and it
Okay.
was set to the beat of the train tracks.
Oh, how
And
interesting. Yeah.
I wrote this poem and I got all the way back and I wrote it down as quick as I could before I forgot it. And I knew that if God was going to keep me alive in that moment,
Mm-hmm.
there had to be something more. And I wasn't going to die there, some nameless, faceless thing on the side of a railroad track.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to have a purpose, and He already had it designed for me.
Okay.
So, because of everything that I had undergone
Mm-hmm.
when I was younger, especially 18 and 19, I had spent literally years studying psychology on my own
Okay.
without anybody knowing, never went to
Okay.
college for it.
Okay.
And I learned about what we used to call Stockholm syndrome, we now call trauma bonding.
Okay.
And I knew that him being a police officer, he would know what that was too.
Right.
So I started dropping these little seeds along the way, trying to
Okay.
convince him that I had Stockholm syndrome.
Okay.
And in about the beginning of June, I told him, I said, I've been here almost the full length of my 6-month visa. And if I overstay my visa, I could get in a lot of trouble and I could get kicked out of the country and never be allowed back because of the UK laws. And you could lose your job as a police officer. But if you send me back, I could come back in time for Christmas and it would be our first Christmas together. And wouldn't that be wonderful?
Wow.
And he bought it.
Okay.
Literally, he bought the ticket round
Right.
trip.
Yeah.
And I just never went back.
Wow. Wow. So you were waterboarded. I mean, this is a physical torture, psychological torture. And you had the presence of mind to know you were suffering and even to go seek somebody to kind of like acknowledge you were suffering that. And it was a child, sort of innocence that kind of saw through whatever you tried to put on an affectation of, "Hey, I'm okay," but that kid knew, and in that moment of truth, it sounds like there was another epiphany for you. It's like, "Hey, I gotta get, I have to resolve myself to get out of this." And it sounds like it opened up a certain amount of creativity. Like, well, if I feign Stockholm syndrome, I'll have some flexibility here that I wouldn't otherwise have, or so you would hope, right? And then
Right.
it worked. So as you returned, did you have a clear understanding of what just happened to you, or how did it
Yeah.
start to like become something you were aware of? And then I'm presuming when you're 38, so 7 years later, some part of you must have understood your experience maybe more deeply than your conscious mind did as a psychology student, and that brought you to want to be a part of combating human trafficking. And maybe that deeper part of you is what brought you to a place where you could understand your own experience. But in the aftermath of that, and you've returned to the United States, and you're among more familiar circumstances, what happens to you? Because you had been, very successful prior to leaving. You had, moved your way into some really substantial professional roles, had a sense of accomplishment. You've been doing really great. And then this gets derailed. When you come back, what's your frame of mind then?
Oh, I was a wreck. I had nowhere to stay. I had
Hmm.
no job lined up. I had nothing. I had lost everything,
Yeah,
essentially. Because when I left, he was so determined that I was returning that we left one of my suitcases there. I left behind
yeah,
half of my life.
right.
And I had already sold off and gotten rid of everything I owned otherwise.
Yeah.
before I went there.
Right.
So I ended up living for a little while with a roommate she had been one of the people that I had hired when I was head of security.
Okay.
She worked a graveyard shift. So when she was at work, I would sleep in the bed and then I would get up in the morning and I would go either job hunting or to work when I finally found a job. And then she would sleep.
Okay.
So it worked out well for a while. But
Okay.
eventually, this guy started lashing out and trying to hunt me down and attack me. And
Mm,
the world of human trafficking, very similar to the world of domestic violence. The most dangerous point in time for somebody is when
right.
they leave.
Okay.
You're a possession to them.
Right.
And he started reaching out every time I got a job or a new friend or something, he would send these photos and these videos to somebody. And
Wow.
he would have something in his email along the lines of, I wouldn't want this in my life, would you? And she got that email one day and she didn't know how to deal with it. She didn't understand how something like this could happen without consent,
Right. Right.
especially to somebody who was in their 30s.
Right. Right. Right.
So she started telling everybody that I had been a high priced call girl and it
Mm,
was all my choice.
wow.
So I lost my friend.
Yeah.
I saved every penny that I had, moved,
Hmm.
got my own place, couldn't stand her, I was so angry for so long, not just because of what had happened to me, but because the only friend like I felt like I could ever have in my life at that moment
Sure.
had suddenly betrayed me too.
Right. Right. Yeah.
It's awful.
So, I mean, the disruption, why you're disrupted makes a lot of sense. And then you seem to have a resilience about you that, like, in the face of things that are difficult, like, although you've experienced the full difficulty, there's some part of you that, like, remains intact and that gives you like a place to start again from. Um,
It's the red
so
hair.
it must be the red hair. When you think about your experiences and what you know about it, what um, what is it in our society that is not understanding or recognizing this as the problem that it is? Like, what status quo force is out there that is not putting a light on this these issues the way it, it would seem we should?
One of the biggest things that we run into in the world of fighting human trafficking are the preconceived ideas
Hmm.
and the lack of education
Right?
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the biggest walls that we run into is when somebody hears a survivor story and then says, but that doesn't look like the movie Taken. That doesn't
Mm,
sound like
right.
the movie Sound of Freedom. So
Yeah.
you didn't survive trafficking because that's not what it is. You weren't kidnapped. You
Right.
weren't 10.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not what trafficking means.
Right.
That's not what it is. That's not what it looks like. This is what it looks like.
Right.
And we have to recognize that when you're sitting in a room of 30 people, more than likely one person in there has been trafficked here in the US.
Okay.
This is not somebody else's problem.
Right. Okay. So it's sort of like a understanding of the problem as a broader issue than it in fact is perceived as, because how we learn the term probably comes to us via either those movies or through the notion of like kids being the notion of kidnapping. Trafficking has that, even as just the word itself, right? I mean, it infers movement, it infers um, movement against your choice. So when are you working with people who have survived this experience in your in the work you're doing in the world? I mean, are you dealing with the folks that have survived these things?
I do. I have this wonderful mentorship thing that is happening now in my world where I will mentor other survivors of all kinds of traumas on how
Okay.
to navigate through their trauma reactions. But I
Okay.
also now own my own publishing company. I'm helping other survivors of trafficking to get books published, and I just helped a young lady to publish her first book last October, and it was a book of poetry.
All right. What's the book called?
It's called Railroad by
Oh,
Jenny Footle, Footle.
and where can you buy
That
Railroad?
one is available at Barnes and Noble and Amazon and all over the place. If you Google it, you'll probably find it.
Okay, excellent. So when you are working with folks that they're obviously interested in healing, which isn't everybody, right? I mean, some people, it's hard to just even get to the point of like, okay, I want to heal. So when you're working with them, what assumptions are you challenging in them to move them from whatever trauma reactions, whatever the right term is that refers to their pain, into a less pained existence that moves them towards feeling peace or whatever would be the goal to, peace, being vibrant in the world, pursuing something out of your own volition rather than reacting against pain that you've had in the past. Like, what assumptions do you have to challenge in them to get them to move in the direction you think is best for them?
A lot of people think that if they stay in the pain, that means that they are
Mm,
being a victim.
okay.
In reality, what we've been taught to do our entire lives is to reach for band-aids. You have an
Hmm.
owie, put a band-aid on it and move on with your life.
Right.
In reality, when it comes to trauma, what we need to start handing out is shovels. We need to dig to the root of the problem because
Interesting.
unless we deal with the root,
Hmm.
it is going to remain and it will come back.
Okay. So when we're talking about the root of the problem, are you referring to the experiences? I mean, that when people come to you, they're not really ready, like you, and we didn't talk about what happened when you were 18 and 19, and we can, or, it's up to you if we want to bring that into the picture. But there was a period of time in which you didn't really have a way to frame those experiences for what they were. So is the root of the problem in that sense like, hey, we need to get to address what happened to you and you haven't been addressing it? Or is it something different than that? So when we talk about the root of a problem, how would you describe it?
It's different for every single person.
Okay.
It's the same thing with the healing process. It's going to be different for every person based on their own life experiences and how they've dealt with things.
Hmm.
For one person, the root of their problem could be a self medication habit that they
Sure.
have developed because they're dealing with a previous trauma.
Yeah.
You have to get to the root of the problem. So you experience trauma, that's why you're self medicating. There's
Right.
the issue. That's where we start.
Okay.
But when we're talking to somebody who has no history of self medication and they're just living in this place of not trusting any human at all because of the betrayals that they have experienced, we have to get to the root of the problem of what betrayals did you experience? How
Mm,
can we start to build trust with somebody who is a trustworthy person?
right. Yeah. I mean, when I listen to you talk about that, like I have a jujitsu practice, right? So I'm a jujitsu athlete, and like one of the cliches that is important to me in the jujitsu world is being comfortable when you're uncomfortable. And so it would
Mhm.
seem to me you're describing a human experience in which somebody's uncomfortable, but they don't know why. If you don't trust anybody, something's wrong, right? Because it crosses out all humanity as potentially trustworthy, and that's not rational. So, do you have a story that is like, we don't have to talk about, give anyone's name, but maybe what that process looked like when somebody you worked with, when they were excavating sort of maybe a past trauma or something like my guess is it wasn't cleanly, like it wasn't like, oh, okay. Oh, oh, you don't trust me. Well, let me tell you what to do. Oh, that's what I do. It's probably messy, right? So what did it look like, in brief, at least, like
It takes work. It's definitely a process. There was
yeah.
one young lady that I was working with who was struggling with a couple of different trauma reactions, and they were
Hmm.
based on early childhood abuse.
Right.
So, one of the issues that she had was road rage. And a lot of people don't realize that that has roots in trauma too.
Okay.
So, when she came to me, she told me that I have this issue with constantly screaming at people, and I know they can't hear me, but I have to get the words out and I need to tell them what I really think of them. And I swear at them. And I'm not like that at any other point in my life.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Getting to the root of that issue, we had to understand, where is this anger bottled up from?
Right.
Why is it that you're so angry? And who were you reminded of, even subconsciously, that's making you want to scream at this person? This person, what did they do that made you so angry?
Right.
And it turned out that this person had violated her little safe bubble, her
Okay.
safe space. And it reminded her of the abuse that she endured at the hands of her father
Mm,
almost every time he ever walked into her bedroom. That was her
mm, my
safe
goodness.
space.
Yeah.
So, getting to the root of it, she was then able to start kind of processing it and working through it. We did a
Yeah.
lot with journaling.
Hmm.
And she is now working on her first book.
Wow. That ability to sort of be present to somebody's pain that they don't understand and then offer them an opportunity, because it probably is a challenging experience. Like your road rage is not your road rage. And someone goes, yes, it is. Like that guy's a jerk. Did you see, like, of course, it's a reasonable reaction to scream and yell. And then if you're like, all right, maybe it's not reasonable, but that guy did do that. I mean, I can imagine trying to say like, well, let's kind of back away from the specific and get to the general. Like, well, since nothing's coming of this, that process probably requires an extraordinary level of patience because you probably everybody's got buttons, right? So probably inadvertently, people you work with must push some button somewhere along the way, and you gotta you can't allow for that because if you react now, you're not helpful to them or to yourself. How do you maintain a sort of quiet presence in the face of like somebody who's really, in my mind, is working out of their amygdala, right? The back, their lizard brain. They're not. It's not in their prefrontal cortex. They're not making decisions. They're just reacting based on things that they don't understand. So moving things from the amygdala, the lizard brain to the front, the wizard brain, whatever cliches you might like to use, right, is it's a hard thing to do. So how do you stay calm in that sort of what must be angry and sad conversations?
It's not always easy.
Hmm.
There can be those moments where I really struggle. In those moments, I have to make sure that I'm taking care of myself first.
Yeah, yeah.
I did spend a little bit of time as a flight attendant, and that whole thing about when the oxygen masks fall, you have to
Yeah,
help yourself before you
yeah,
help somebody else.
yeah, yeah.
It applies. It
Right,
applies to pretty much everything in life. If you can't take care of yourself, what good are you going to be to anybody else?
right, right.
So if it comes up where my blood starts to boil and I start getting upset,
Yeah,
I will tell them, okay, we need to take like a 5-minute recess. Let's just take a break,
right.
walk away, go have a drink of water. We'll practice our grounding techniques. And I will go
Okay,
through the process of the 5 things that you see, and the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 senses, deep
okay,
breathing exercises, whatever it takes. And I'll
okay.
get us both to do this together a lot of times because it helps to put both of us in a
Yes.
better mindset.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think although it's not probably 100% true, I think the notion of if you've been through something similar to what I've been through, it's easier for me to trust you because your ability to understand me is higher. Like I don't think everybody who's experienced trauma necessarily is the right person to attend to the next person. I mean, I don't know that that's 100% true. However, there's some real advantages to being able to say, me, you know, I understand because I've been through something sort of similar. However, it also opens up an opportunity to, to re-experience your own trauma as you work with folks. So it must take a lot of self-awareness to recognize, like, hey, my own amygdala is kicking in here, and uh, I'm reacting to these things as if they're pushing on my own issues of being hurt in the past. I think that's a special healing trait for counselors. Is how do you have come through your own stuff, be present to somebody else's stuff, and then create a place where both of you can work through things. People have traumas to different degrees, right? Like every my grandmother liked to say, "Hey, look, everybody gets something." So there may be somebody who is not trafficked, but has something that they're aware of. Like, hey, I had this thing and it's in the way of me living the life that I want to lead. So, do you have any small incremental steps you could offer? Maybe someone's listening and they're like, I just want to ease away from the part of me that's in pain and move towards a more vital existence. Like, how might somebody, maybe they're not ready to engage someone like you, but they want to do something. Like, what would you tell them? What would your advice be?
Start small. That's
Mhm.
the easiest way to get started. We always hear the cliche of how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. We're not
Right.
eating elephants. We are um, vomiting trauma.
Hmm.
Yeah. And we also have to understand that trauma is not a trophy. It's never a competition. Yes, we do
Sure.
experience it in variable ways,
Right.
but trauma will change your brain. And you go through these stages of grieving, which
Yeah.
stages of trauma and the stages of grief are the exact same. And it's
Okay.
because you have to grieve for the person that you were, because
Hmm.
that person is no more. And the person you were going to be will now never exist.
Right. Right.
You are someone else. And it's okay to grieve.
Right.
It's not okay to stay there forever,
Sure.
but start one step at a time. If you're having problems trusting somebody, ask somebody to help you with something small first and work up from there. Can you
Okay.
hand me that pen from the other side of the table?
Okay. So
Start
you'd have
small.
to um so an act of a small act, a small step in the direction kind of means that you have to have a sense of what a small act is. I think it would be easy to think of what do you want me to do? I had this thing happen when I see other people or I see a man or I see whatever is like the thing that like, oh, how can I be different? Then it has to have the self-awareness, it sounds like, to say, well, can you do something? Can you ask for a pen? Like you're at the library, you ask for a pen or whatever. And that it can be a triumph in and of itself, right? I mean, where
Yeah.
you kind of like can be aware, I need this thing. I need a lot of it, but can I get a tiny bit of it? Um, there's a part of your brain that literally changes when you do something that you don't want to do. And it is associated with the building of it is the physical manifestation of your willpower. And the more you do something you don't want to do, you actually strengthen that. So you hate to groove in bad habits, right? Like if you're like, don't want to do something that injures you, that's one thing. But mostly, you know, people don't want to get up early and exercise. So it, it takes the form of that more than it takes the form of, eating pizza or something like that.
I do
Well,
both, by the way. I get up
yeah, no,
early and I eat pizza.
very good. Well, I trust your ability to have a lot of willpower because you have been through many different things. When someone's listening and they go, well, you know what, I like what I'm hearing, and maybe they want to learn more about you. How do they do that?
It's really easy to find me. I'm all over Facebook. I would probably write more than 2 books a year if I wasn't on Facebook as much as
Okay,
I am. But if you just Google Amanda Blackwood, the survivor, you'll find my podcast. My website is growthfromdarkness.com. You'll
nice.
find my Facebook, my Instagram, all that stuff. I'm
Oh,
out there and I need to not be out there as much as I am, but I'm out there.
okay, all right. So you're easy to find at least, and if somebody's listening and they don't know what to do, my guess is that if they find your website, find your social media profiles, there's probably little steps they'll glean from the site. So even if they don't know what to do, if they just go look, take a chance at like, let me go kind of absorb a little bit about what Amanda's saying. Maybe it
Yeah.
will set them on a new direction. That's
Absolutely. And if they need the help, I can absolutely schedule at any point a 30-minute Google Meet meeting with anybody from around the world just to
okay.
sit down and hang out for a little bit, just get some basic information and maybe
Okay.
ask me some questions.
Yeah. Oh, that's very generous. That's yeah. Well, you're tackling some extraordinary experiences out there that have hurt people, and that produces all kinds of pain, and not everybody would want to spend their energy being in proximity to that. So thank you for improving the world, because I think that, right, I mean, I think it's hard, these things happen to people, and then it's like, well, what do I do? And it's hard to figure out what to do. And then can you get a person with the right temperament? All those things are so complicated. So appreciate the fact you're improving the world for us.
Thank you. You're so sweet.
That's generous. Thank you. Well, look, for those of you who have been around for some of our previous conversations, again, today we have a modern revolutionary in Amanda Blackwood. And one of the things that I would like for you to take away from the conversation is not just the content of what we've talked about, but that, Amanda's brave enough to come and talk about how she's trying to improve the world. And I think that that's reason for you to feel encouraged that you can improve the world too. And I'd like for you to take your ideas and your impulses to make things better and bring them out there because the modern revolution needs us all.